Ferguson gave a gesture of relief. "It is what I hoped, Mr. Holmes. There is an excellent train at 2 from Victoria if you could come." "Of course we could come. There's a lull at present. I can give you my undivided energies. Watson, of course, comes with us. But there are 1 or 2 points upon which I wish to be very sure before I start. This unhappy lady, as I understand it is, has appeared to assault both the children, her own baby and your little son. That is so, but the assaults take different forms, do they not? She has beaten your son, once with a stick and once savagely with her hands. Did she give no explanations why she struck him?" "None save that she hated him. Again and again she said so." "Well, that is not unknown amongst stepmothers. A posthumous jealousy, we will say. Is the lady jealous by nature?" "Yes, she's very jealous, jealous with all the strength in her fiery tropical love. But the boy, he is 15, I understand, and probably very developed in mind. Since his body has been circumscribed in action, did he give you no explanation of these assaults?" "No, he declared there was no reason. Were they good friends at other times?" "No, there was never any love between them." "Yet, you say he is affectionate?" "Never in the world could there be so a devoted son. My life is his life. My life is his life. He is absorbed in what I say or do." Once again Mr. Holmes made a note. For some time he sat lost in thought. "No doubt you and the boy were great comrades before the second marriage. You were thrown very close together, were you not?" "Very much so, and the boy, having so affectionate a nature, was devoted no doubt to the memory of his mother. Most devoted. He would certainly seem to be a most interesting lad. There is one other point about these assaults. Were there strange attacks upon the baby and the assaults upon your son at the same period?" "In the first case, it was so. It was as if some frenzy had seized her, and she had vented her rage upon both. In the second case, it was only Jack who suffered. Miss Mason had no complaint to make about the baby." "That certainly complicates matters. I don't quite follow you, Mr. Holmes." "Possibly not. One forms provisional theories and waits for time or fuller knowledge to explode them. A bad habit, Mr. Ferguson, but human nature is weak. I fear that your old friend here has given an exaggerated view of my scientific methods. However, I will only say at the present stage that your problem does not appear to me to be insoluble, and that you may expect to find us at Victoria at 2 o'clock. It was an evening of dull, foggy November day when we have left our bags at the Chequers. Lamberley we drove through the Sussex clay of a long winding lane and finally reached the isolated and ancient farmhouse which Ferguson dwelt. It was a large, straggling building, very old in the center, very new at the wings, with towering two-door chimneys and a lichen-spotted high-pitched roof of Horsham slabs. The doorsteps were worn into curves, and the ancient tiles which lined the porch were marked with the rubus of a cheese and a man after the original builder. Within the ceilings were corrugated with heavy oak beams, and the uneven floors sagged into sharp curves. An odor of age and decay pervaded the whole crumbling building. There was one very large central room into which Ferguson led us. Here, in a huge old-fashioned fireplace with an iron screen behind it dated 1670, there blazed and spluttered a splendid log fire. The room, as I gazed round, was a most singular mixture of dates and of places. The half-paneled walls may well have belonged to the original yeoman farmer of the 17th century. They were ornamented, however, on the lower part of the line, of well-chosen modern watercolors, while above, very yellow plaster took the place of oak. There was a hung fine collection of South African utensils and weapons, which had been brought, no doubt, by the Peruvian lady upstairs. Holmes rose, with that curiosity which sprang from his eager mind, and examined them with some care. He returned with eyes full of thought. "Holla!" he cried. "Holla!" A spaniel had lain in the basket in the corner. It came slowly forward towards master. Walking with difficulty, its hind legs moved irregularly, and its tail was one on the ground. It licked Ferguson's hand. "What is it, Mr. Holmes?" "The dog. What's the matter with it?" That's what puzzled the vet. A sort of paralysis, spinal meningitis, he thought. But it is passing. He'll be all right soon, won't you, Carlo? A shiver of assent passed through the drooping tail. The dog's mournful eyes passed from one of us into the other. He knew that they were discussing the case. Did it come on suddenly, in a single night? How long ago? It may have been more than 4 months ago. Very remarkable, very suggestive. What do you see in it, Mr. Holmes? A confirmation of what I had already thought. For God's sakes, what do you think, Mr. Holmes? It may be a mere intellectual puzzle to you, but it is life and death to me. My wife, a would-be murderer, my child in constant danger. Don't play with me, Mr. Holmes. It is terribly serious. The big rugby 3/4 was trembling all over. Holmes put his hand soothingly upon his arm. I fear that there is pain for you, Mr. Ferguson. Whatever the solution may be, said he, I would spare you all I can. I cannot say more for the instant, but before I leave this house, I hope I may have some definite answer. Please God you may. If you will excuse me, gentlemen, I will go up to my wife's room and see if there has been any change. He was away for some minutes, during which Holmes resumed his examination of the curiosities upon the wall. When our host returned, it was clear from his downcast face that he had made no progress. He brought with him a tall, slim, brown-faced girl. The tea is ready, Dolores, said Ferguson. See that your mistress has everything that she wish. She vera ill, cried the girl, looking with indignant eyes at her master. She no ask for food. She vera ill. She need doctor. I frightened to stay alone with her without doctor. Ferguson looked at me with a question in his eyes. I should be so glad if I could be of use. Would your mistress see Dr. Watson? I take him. I no ask leave. She needs doctor. Then I'll come with you at once. I followed the girl, who was quivering with strong emotion, upon the staircase and down an ancient corridor. At the end was an iron-clamped and massive door. It struck me as I looked at it that if Ferguson tried to force his way to his wife, he would find it no easy matter. The girl drew a key from her pocket, and the heavy oaken planks creaked upon their old hinges. I passed in, and she swiftly followed, fastening the door behind her. On the bed, a woman was lying, who was clearly in high fever. She was only of half consciousness, but as I entered, she raised a pair of frightened but beautiful eyes and glared at me in apprehension. Seeing a stranger, she appeared to be relieved and sank back with a sigh upon the pillow. I stepped up to her with a few reassuring words, and she lay still while I took her pulse and temperature. Both were high, and yet my impression was that the condition was rather that of a mental and nervous excitement than of any actual seizure. She lie like that 1 day, 2 day. I afraid she die, said the girl. The woman turned her flushed and handsome face towards me. Where is my husband? He is below, and would wish to see you. I will not see him. I will not see him. Then she seemed to wander off into a delirium. A fiend, a fiend. Oh, what shall I do with this devil? Can I help you in any way? No, no one can help. It is finished. All is destroyed. Do what I will, all is destroyed. The woman must have some strange delusion. I could not see honest Bob Ferguson in the character of fiend or devil. Madame, I said, your husband loves you dearly. He is deeply grieved at this happening. Again she turned on me with those glorious eyes. He loves me, yes, but I do not love him. I do not love him even to sacrifice myself rather than to break his dear heart. That is how I love him. And yet he could think of me. He could speak of me so. He is full of grief, but he cannot understand. No, he cannot understand, but he should trust. Will you not see him? I suggested. No, no. I cannot forget these terrible words, nor the look upon his face. I will not see him. Go now. You can do nothing for me. Tell him only one thing. I want my child. I have a right to my child. That is the only message I can send him. She turned her face to the wall and would say no more. I returned to the room downstairs where Ferguson and Holmes still sat by the fire. Ferguson listened moodily to my account of the interview. How can I send her the child, he said. How do I know what strange impulse might come upon her? How can I ever forget how she rose from the bed with its blood upon her lips? He shuddered at the recollection. The child is safe with Miss Mason, and there he must remain. A smart maid, the only modern thing which we had seen in the house, had brought some tea in. As she was serving it, the door opened, and Youth entered the room. He was a remarkable lad, pale-faced and fair-haired, with excitable light blue eyes which blazed into a sudden flame of emotion and joy as they rested upon his father. He rushed forward and threw his arm around his neck with the abandon of a loving girl. "Oh, Daddy," he cried, "I do not know what they were to do yet. I should have been here to meet you. Oh, I am so glad to see you." Ferguson gently disengaged himself from the embrace with some little show of embarrassment. "Dear old chap," said he, patting the flaxen head with a tender hand. "I came early because my friends, Mr. Holmes and Dr. Watson, have been persuaded to come down and spend an evening with us." "Is that Mr. Holmes, the detective?" "Yes." The youth looked at us with a very penetrating and, as it seemed to me, unfriendly gaze. "What about your other child, Mr. Ferguson?" asked Holmes. "Might we make the acquaintance of the baby?" "Ask Miss Mason to bring the baby down," said Ferguson. The boy went off with a curious, shambling gait, which told my surgical eyes that he was suffering from a weak spine. Presently he returned, and behind him came a tall, gaunt woman, bearing in her arms a very beautiful child, dark-eyed, golden hair, and a wonderful mixture of Saxon and the Latin. Ferguson was evidently devoted to it, for he took it into his arms and fondled it most tenderly. "Fancy anyone having the heart to hurt him," he muttered as he glanced down at the small, angry red pucker upon the cherub throat. It was at this moment that I chanced to glance at Holmes and saw a most singular intentness in his expression. His face was as set as if it had been carved out of an old ivory, and his eyes, which had glanced for a moment at father and child, were now fixed with eager curiosity upon something at the other side of the room. Following his gaze, I could only guess that he was looking out through the window at the melancholy dripping garden. It is true that a shutter had half closed outside and obstructed the view, but nonetheless it was certainly at the window that Holmes was fixating his concentrated attention. Then he smiled, and his eyes came back to the baby. On its chubby neck there was this small puckered mark. Without speaking, Holmes examined it with care. Finally he shook one of the dimpled fists, which waved in front of him. "Goodbye, little man. You have made a strange start in life. Nurse, I should wish to have a word with you in private." He took her aside and spoke earnestly for a few minutes. I only heard the last words, which were, "Your anxiety will soon, I hope, be set at rest." The woman, who seemed to be a sour, silent kind of creature, withdrew with the child. "What is Miss Mason like?" asked Holmes. "Not very prepossessing externally, as you can see, but a heart of gold, and devoted to the child." "Do you like her, Jack?" Holmes turned suddenly upon the boy. His expressive mobile face shadowed over, and he shook his head. "Jackie has very strong likes and dislikes," said Ferguson, putting his arm round the boy. "Luckily I am one of his likes." The boy cooed and nestled upon his head upon his father's breast. Ferguson gently disengaged him. "Run away, little Jackie," said he. And he watched his son with loving eyes until he disappeared. "Now, Mr. Holmes," he continued when the boy was gone, "I really feel that I have brought you on a fool's errand. for what you can possibly do to give me your sympathy. It must be an exceedingly delicate and complex affair from your point of view." "It is certainly delicate," said my friend, with an amused look. "But I have not been struck up to now with its complexity. It has been a case for intellectual deduction, but with its original intellectual deduction is confirmed point by quite a number of independent incidences. When the subjective becomes objective, and we can say confidently that we have reached our goal, I had, in fact, reached it before we left Baker Street, and the rest has merely been observation and confirmation." Ferguson put his big hand to his forehead. "For heaven's sakes, Holmes," he said hoarsely, "if you can see the truth in this matter, do not keep it in suspense. How do I stand? What shall I do? I care nothing as to know how you have found your facts, so long as you have really got them. Certainly I owe you an explanation, and you shall have it, but you will permit me to handle the matter in my own way. Is the lady capable of seeing us, Watson? She is ill, but she is quite rational. Very good. It is only in her presence that we can clear the matter up. Let's go up to her." "She will not see me," cried Ferguson. "Oh, yes, she will," said Holmes. He scribbled a few lines upon a sheet of paper. "You at least have the entree, Watson. Will you have the goodness to give this to the lady?" I ascended again and handed the note to Dolores, who cautiously opened the door. A minute later I heard a cry from within, a cry in which joy and surprise seemed to be blended. Dolores looked out. "She will see them. She will listen," she said. At my summons, Ferguson and Holmes came up. As we entered the room, Ferguson took a step or two towards the wife. He had raised herself in the bed, but she held out her hand to repulse him. He sank into an armchair, while Holmes seated himself beside him, after bowing to the lady, who looked at him with a wide eye of amazement. "I think we can dispense with Dolores," said Holmes. "Oh, very well. Madam, if you would rather she stayed, I see no objection. Now, Mr. Ferguson, I am a busy man with many calls, and my methods have to be short and direct. The swiftest surgery is the least painful. Let me first say what will ease your mind. Your wife is a very good, a very loving, and a very ill-used woman." Ferguson sat up with a cry of joy. "Prove that, Mr. Holmes, and I am your debtor forever. I will do so, but in doing so, I must wound you deeply in another direction. I care nothing so as long as you clear my wife. Everything on earth is insignificant compared to that. Let me tell you, then, the train of reasoning which passed through my mind in Baker Street. The idea of a vampire was to me absurd. Such things do not happen in criminal practice in England, and yet your observation was precise. You had seen the lady rise from the bed of the child's cot, with the blood upon her lips. I did. Did it not occur to you that a bleeding wound may be sucked from other than purpose than to draw the blood from it? Was there not a queen in English history who sucked such a wound to draw poison from it? Poison? A South American household. My instinct felt that the presence of those weapons upon the wall before my eyes wherever saw them. It might have been other poisons, but that was what occurred to me. When I saw that little empty quiver beside the small bird bough, it was just what I expected to see. If the child was pricked with one of those arrows dipped in curare, or some other devilish drug, it would mean death if the venom were not sucked out. And the dog? If one were to use such a poison, would one not try it first in order to see that it had not lost its power? I do not foresee that the dog, but at least I understand him, and he fitted it with my reconstruction. Now do you understand? Your wife feared such an attack. She saw it, made it, and saved the child's life, and yet she shrank from telling you all the truth, for she knew how you loved the boy and feared lest it break your heart. Jackie, I watched him as you fondled the child just now. His face was clearly reflected in the glass of the window where the shutter formed a background. I saw such jealousy, such cruel hatred, as I've seldom seen in a human face. My Jackie? You have to face it, Mr. Ferguson. It is the more painful because it is distorted love, a maniacal, exaggerated love for you, and possibly for his dead mother, which has prompted his action. His very soul is consumed with hatred for this splendid child, whose health and beauty are a contrast to his own weakness. Good God, it is incredible. Have I spoken the truth, madam? The lady was sobbing, with her face buried in the pillows. Now she turned to her husband. How could I tell you, Bob? I felt the blow it would be to you. It was better that I should wait, and that it should come from some other lips than mine. When this gentleman, who seems to have powers of magic, wrote that he knew all, I was glad. I think a year at sea would be my prescription for Master Jack, he said, Holmes, raising from his chair. Only one thing is clouded, madam. We can quite understand your attacks upon Master Jackie. There is a limit to a mother's patience. But how did you dare to leave the child there the last 2 days? I had told Miss Mason. She knew, exactly. So I imagined. Mr. Ferguson was standing by the bed, choking, his hands outstretched and quivering. This, I fancy, is the time for our exit, Mr. Watson, said Holmes in a whisper. If you will take one elbow of the too faithful Dolores, I will take the other. There now, he added as he closed the door behind him. I think we may leave them to settle the rest among themselves. I have only one further note of this case. It is the letter which Holmes read in the final answer to that which the narrative begins. It read thus: Baker Street, November 21st, Reeve Vampires. Sir, referring to your letter of the 19th, I beg to state that I have looked into the inquiry of your client, Mr. Robert Ferguson of Ferguson and Meyerhead, tea brokers of Mincing Lane, and that the matter has been brought to a satisfactory conclusion with the thanks to your recommendation. I am, sir, faithfully yours, Sherlock Holmes.